Hello everyone and welcome to the Good Old Gamer. Hope everybody's having a great Friday out there. So this week has been very interesting. Chock full of news from tech to games and all sorts of craziness going on out there. We have information about Intel Arc and how that compares to Nvidia's graphics cards. That's a big deal. We have a lot of information about the upcoming RTX 3050 coming out almost literally as we speak. I have another article that just came up right before I started recording. So we're going to be talking about all of that. The RX 6500 XT, well, universally, everybody seems to hate it. So there's that. Everybody's on board or on the same page with that one. We'll touch on that a little bit. And the big news of the week, and possibly the biggest news for gaming of the year, possibly of the decade, Microsoft acquiring Activision. So we're going to talk about all of that in this video. I'm going to rapid fire through the smaller stories as quickly as possible. So strap in, grab some popcorn, and let's get to it. So we're going to start off with RTX 3050 news, as this has been coming out pretty much rapid fire over the past few days. Nvidia claims the RTX 3050 is infinitely times faster than the 1650 and 1050. I just wanted to throw this in here because this is pretty funny what Nvidia did. So basically they showed this chart on their website, basically comparing the RTX 3050 to its predecessors, I suppose you could call it, considering this was $100, this was $150, and this is probably going to be $300 to $500. Not really predecessors, but regardless. But they wanted to show you with ray tracing on, well, these two cards do nothing. So basically you just have one graph out there. So this is how confident Nvidia is in their new graphics card that they have to compare it to things that can't even run the games. It's pretty hilarious that they even did this. So not really a big deal. It's just really silly marketing that they went ahead and decided to do. More interesting and more relevant, Nvidia GeForce RTX 3050 reviews to arrive on January 26th, a day before launch. So this is actually good news, unlike what happened with the RX 6500 XT, where you got reviews the day the card came out. We'll actually all know how powerful or not this card will actually be before you can go out and buy them. So you have all the information you need to make up your mind. But let's be honest, it's for Nvidia to get reviews out there where people can only use the MSRP. There's no real world data for anybody to draw from. So they will go at $250. This card is great. Meanwhile, these will likely be $300 to $450 day one, and then $450 to $550 the day after, if it performs basically like a 2060, because RTX 2060s are going for $500 to $600 right now. So while this is good news, it's also just smart marketing. So they did the dumb marketing, now we have smart marketing. That's why I wanted to show you the first one. They don't always get it right. And then this information just came out. The RTX 3050 is for gamers, not miners. Basically, some guys over in China tested out the mining performance of the RTX 3050, and it looks like they're only getting between 20-ish to 12.5 mega hash, and this was at 73 watts. So this is not very good. Apparently, this is about as much as the 6500 XT, except the 6500 XT is at about 30 watts. So it looks like perhaps Nvidia actually bumped up their LHR a little bit stronger for this particular card. So this isn't going to be particularly good for miners, as they did the ROI on it. Even at MSRP, it's at 500 days. And if it's $350, that's 700 days. And if it's $400 or $500, well, you know, it just gets exponentially worse from there. So likely these might not be scooped up by miners. However, there's still plenty of scalpers out there, as they do talk about in the article. And as that relates to crypto is going down. Ethereum down 7.7% as of writing, and that's just today. So if we go back to the 5-day period, we're down 17.34% over the past 5 days. Had a little recovery, and then boom. This is likely due to the fact that Russia is no longer going to allow crypto mining, and they are the world's third largest country for it. So yeah, crypto mining is on its way out from the looks of things. We can take a look at the 1 month. We're down a whopping 31.12%. So yeah, at 2,700, this is still profitable-ish under certain conditions. We need this to drop about another $1,000. And then at that point in time, I would suspect we will start seeing a huge glut of GPUs, secondhand GPUs, hitting the market, and that will push down prices even further. Now, this next story isn't really a story. I just haven't talked about it on this channel. If you guys saw our podcast the other day, Paul and I talked about this at length. I'm sure we're going to talk about this again tomorrow. If you want to join up, click the link in the description below. Subscribe over to the Techonomics podcast. You can chat with us live about these things. But all right, so the RX 6500 XT comes out and gets negative reviews, and that's kind of putting it mildly. I think a lot of the criticism out there is directed at AMD, because they're reflecting what the current market is actually doing with these things. But at the same time, this is as stripped down a card as humanly possible. At $199, it's barely tolerable. And as I'm going to show you, they're no longer $199 and haven't been since the initial drop, which only lasted about 10 minutes. Jumping on over here to Newegg, the only RX 6500 XT in stock is the Power Color ITX 6500 XT, the smallest one, which means it's got the least amount of materials, which is the cheapest version. This was $199 on launch day, and yesterday came back in stock at $269.99 and remains in stock at that price point. That's because at this particular price point, the card simply does not make sense. If we jump on over here to eBay, you can see that RX 580 4GB cards, which in terms of performance is roughly the same, are coming in at about $255, $260 for similar style cards. You can get some better coolers if you want to pay a little bit more, but this is basically the same price as the 6500 XT and will work better on older machines and has media encoding and a bunch of other features that the 6500 XT does not. So in my opinion, this is the price the card was always intended to be at, but this is literally pushing it to its absolute maximum. And then as I just showed you, crypto is starting to fall apart. If you can wait a few more months, these will likely slide back down towards that $199 MSRP that they were in stock for all of 3 microseconds, because I was watching this as it came out and I'd never had a chance to buy one ever. Some of you guys were lucky if you live near a micro center, you can still get them at the $199 price point, but once that initial stock runs out, this is the price these cards are going to be. So yeah, that just makes this card even worse. And then to add to the hilarity, AMD quietly tried to remove their own blog post saying that 4 GB of memory is not enough for today's games. They got caught in this as they obviously just released the 6500 XT and they wanted to try to hide it. But everybody found them out and called them out, so they did return it. But it's just funny how they're going to talk out of one side of their mouth when it benefits them and then immediately do the opposite when it benefits them as well. So anybody who thinks that AMD is a good company, here you go. They are not. They're just not as bad as Nvidia. So yeah, that's the main reason why this space really needs competition, because you have a really bad company and then you have a worse company. Those are your only two options at this point in time. But wait, maybe not. Leaked benchmarks of Intel's Arc Alchemist discrete desktop GPU shows RTX 3070 Ti performance. So this is showing an Intel Z HPG card with 512 execution units and at 2.1 gigahertz. So we're expecting actually slightly higher clock speeds from this, as it is on TSMC's 6nm process, and we know that those can clock extremely high, especially when the FP32 core count isn't too terribly high. Now, the benchmarks that they show, they're not for gaming. It's just for general purpose data processing. It's basically compute performance. The card scored higher than the 3070 Ti with a score of 9,000 megapixels, 7.7 faster, and then 8,300. That's not really that useful to us as gamers. Now, the article continues to go over a few other things where the Arc Alchemist appears to be faster in half floating point. So that'd be 16-bit, double floating point, which is 64, and quad float, which would be 128. However, it does lose in single float, which is FP32, which is typically what's used for games. Now, this is without a doubt the most interesting bit of information that we've got here today. Now, we've always expected Arc to compete with something like a 3060 Ti, maybe a 3070, but to compete with a 3070 Ti, even though it's not a whole lot faster, it just shows that there's more in the tank there than a lot of people might have been guessing. So if Intel can get this thing out in a reasonable time frame, if the drivers are stable enough and they have a decent amount of supply, I think that this is going to be a pretty good card. Now, the 512 EUs I'm getting information that we're not going to see a 512 EU version on the consumer side. So I'm not entirely sure if we should take this as a grain of salt. I mean, it's a leak. You should always do that. But I don't know how much stock we can put into these numbers. But if Intel is being that competitive, it's really just going to come down to drivers and game optimization and things of that nature for them to fully utilize that. I do believe that they have the team to make that happen. I just don't think it's going to happen day one. And that's where those rumors of 3060 Ti and 3070 level performance are probably going to be more likely. Even if the card is technically as fast as a 3070 Ti class graphics card, it's probably not going to perform there day one. They're going to need driver optimizations over time to get that performance. So it sounds like we're going to need a meme for Intel's fine wine. There's no blue wines out there that I'm aware of, so it doesn't quite work as well as with AMD. So I leave it to you guys in the community to come up with something, because I do believe that those cards will have a lot more in the tank that we will see over the next few years. And then finally, the biggest news probably of all time, if you are a gamer and actually care about games more than you do hardware, because what's the point of having gaming hardware if you don't play games? That's kind of my thought process. But Microsoft is to acquire Activision Blizzard and bring the joy and community of gaming to everyone across every device. That sounds like marketing to me. Anyways, this right here is a big deal because there are huge franchises in there, and there's a ton of potential positives and a ton of potential negatives from this acquisition. So once again, Paul and I kind of touched on this yesterday in the podcast. We'll probably talk about it tomorrow. If you want to interact and ask questions and stuff live, make sure you subscribe. Links are down below for the Techonomics podcast. But I'm just going to give you kind of my biggest hopes and my biggest fears of this acquisition. Number one, this is a shot heard around the world. Microsoft is not going to play second fiddle anymore, and they're basically going to try and push Sony out of the market. Now, they're not going to do it like forcefully. They're just going to gobble up so many IPs that if you don't have a Microsoft platform, you're going to be missing out on way more than Sony, for example. So the whole, well, Sony has exclusives. Well, those 5 or 10 games per generation that they make that are really, really good is not going to be enough to justify buying their platform, because Microsoft will now have like 50 or 100 games that you absolutely want to play every generation. And that's really not good, to be perfectly honest with you. This is going to stifle competition. And I'm really worried that Microsoft is going to present such huge value to everybody through something like Game Pass. Hey, look at all of these games you get. Maybe they'll have 2 or 3 exclusive games every single month on their Game Pass, to where it's stupid if you don't have it. Paul and I mathed it out, and even with 18 million Game Pass subscribers, they were bringing in about $250 million per month, something to that effect, if you math it out and account, because there is a $10 tier and a $15 tier. But regardless, if you math it out, that's a lot. So if they double or triple their Game Pass subscriptions, they might eventually get to the point where they have $1 billion per month in revenue coming in. And honestly, there's really nothing Sony would ever be able to do to compete with that. And it's not just Sony. It's also companies like Steam and Valve. They're not going to be able to deal with Microsoft as a juggernaut. Because if every PC gamer now has Game Pass, and Windows 11 has like the Game Pass storefront built right into it, as far as I'm aware. I haven't really messed with Windows 11 that much, but I know that if it's not there, it's planned to be there. It's going to make the Microsoft Store a lot more appealing for people, so they're not going to want to buy their games on Steam, because you already have Game Pass, and people like to have all their libraries clumped together. It's just easier and cleaner and all the rest of that. So this is going to put a lot of pressure on virtually every platform out there if they're able to provide. Well, they're already doing it, but if they're able to provide even more value to the point where you absolutely have to have Game Pass because it's such a good deal that you're just throwing money away if you don't, this can lead to a monopolistic situation over the next 10, 15, maybe 20 years. Now, there are regulatory agencies out there that are supposed to stop that, and maybe it doesn't get quite that bad, but honestly, I can see this getting to the point where if you want AAA gaming, you have to go Microsoft. So that means either Windows or Xbox. Sony will flounder and eventually go away. Nintendo will always be around, but they're kind of doing their own thing. So if you like Nintendo, you'll have that option, but you're not going to have the cutting edge AAA gaming available there. And then your only other option is going to be basically indies on something like GOG over on PC, because I can definitely see Microsoft cannibalizing all of Steam, Epic Game Store, Origin. The only one that can stand up to this would be GOG, because they're DRM free. This is a feature that Microsoft's never going to allow. So they're the only ones that are going to be kind of the niche that makes sense. So that's my biggest fears. My biggest hopes and the upsides to this is Activision's a crap company, number one, and Microsoft's going to clean house and make sure that their ducks are in a row. Everybody's taken care of. The employees are going to have a better work life, everything. Everything will be better there. So that's good for them. For us as potential customers, the games that we like from Activision and Blizzard that they made in the 90s, early 2000s, that sort of era, when there were a lot of great games coming out of those studios, those will likely come back. We'll see a lot of remasters, games made for consoles that maybe never were. We might see a StarCraft available on the Xbox. I know a lot of you guys are like, well, why would you need that? You play StarCraft on PC. Yeah, I get that. But there's a whole lot of other people that have never played StarCraft. There's an entire generation or two, actually, that have never played that game because it wasn't relevant in their time frame. Putting it on the Xbox gets people into it, and the Xbox does support keyboard and mouse now, so maybe it'll have that. Regardless, I could see that coming on over and becoming more mainstream. So a lot of the older games that we really liked from these companies, I can see them being brought back. A big one that I'm looking forward to is Singularity. I think I actually recommended it on one of my videos. They do have it over on GOG, but it's not available on modern consoles, not even through backwards compatibility. Well, Microsoft will own that. And they'll also own Raven Software, which has made tons of great first-person shooters, kind of your AA first-person shooter level, not quite AAA, but they're some of the most fun games from the early 2000s that I can remember. So, you know, they'll have a team there that's been relegated to what people call the Call of Duty salt mines, coming back, actually making real games again, hopefully, or at least the potential to do so. So I think that that's the upside, and then there's a lot of risks on the other side. So for the short term, at least the next 5 or 6 years, things are going to be very rosy because they got to get everybody acclimated and be like, oh man, this is the best thing ever. Why wouldn't I do this? It's once they have the market under their fist, that's when things are going to flip. You know, Game Pass prices will start going up and up and up and up. You know, probably a couple bucks every few years, you know, which isn't that big of a deal until you're like 10 or 20 years into it. And you're like, hey, this is like $100 a month for this thing in relative money. Obviously, inflation could kick that up even higher. But, you know, if there's no other options and there's no competition, why wouldn't they charge you $100 a month? That's kind of my point, and that's the big fear. So I'm really interested to hear your guys' thoughts on that one. So now that we're talking about games, let me go ahead and wrap this video up with an excellent game that I recommend everybody play. If you haven't played this before, you're really missing out. All right, and that is Star Wars Rogue Squadron. I like how it's Rogue Squadron 3D on PC. Now, to me, this is one of my favorite Star Wars games of all time. It's a little bit more arcadey than something like X-Wing or TIE Fighter. That's a little bit more serious. This is definitely a little bit more arcadey and just sit back and have fun. It's a very difficult game, though. This is a very challenging game. It'll take you a while to get used to it. Actually, this level right here, I've actually never beat. It's actually extremely difficult. But it's a hell of a lot of fun if you like Star Wars, if you like, I guess you could say almost like cheesy flight sims, where they're not real flight sims, but pseudo flight sims. Excellent game, can't recommend it enough. And for $10, you'll have hours and hours of fun on your hands. And this is one that I return to regularly, so I could definitely recommend it. Well, alrighty guys, there's all the news of the week, the condensed version. Now, there's few things that slip through the cracks there. And of course, if you want more in-depth conversation about this, the Techonomics podcast is where it's at. I strongly recommend you guys go over there. Really love chatting and interacting with you guys directly. Paul and I do a midweek podcast, usually Wednesdays or Thursdays, depending on scheduling, but we go every Saturday. So tomorrow, if you want to join, that'll be 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, or that's 8 p.m. GMT for you guys over there in Europe. And if you're elsewhere in the world, you got to kind of figure it out from there. I'm sorry, guys. I just do Europe and US, and that's about it. Trying to calculate when we had Steve from Hardware Unboxed on, him in Australia. I think he's 17 hours ahead of me, 17 hours into the future. Man, that was just crazy scheduling that. But if you haven't seen that, we do have that live. That was last week. We had Steve on, and we have guests regularly, so I recommend jumping on over there and checking us out. And that's really all I have for you guys here today. and I will catch you guys in the next video.